Red Bull just made a huge mistake, or some might say a smart move to gain an unfair advantage for the 2024 season. As we all know, AlphaTauri, formerly known as Toro Rosso, has been Red Bull Racing's sister team for over a decade now. Although these teams have been operating separately, recent comments made by the team led to many fans thinking that Red Bull and AlphaTauri might be helping each other out under the nose of FIA and have found a new loophole in the regulations. So how true is it, and will other teams do something about it? Stick around and find out. It goes without saying that AlphaTauri was one of the biggest disappointments as a team at the start of the season, finishing in the worst spot on the grid and only managing a few points in the first 17 races. Additionally, the team had trouble placing its drivers in order, starting Nick de Vries in the first 10 races. Despite this, he caused a few crashes and displayed subpar performance. Perhaps if the team had given him more time, he could have improved. But given the harsh reality of Red Bull's relentless pursuit to success, he was fired prior to the Hungarian Grand Prix. Ricciardo replaced de Vries following his sacking, and after a couple of Grand Prix with average performance, his crash at the Zandvoort track saw him sidelined for 5 races as he recovered from a broken wrist. The only upside of this whole incident was Liam Lawson getting to prove his mettle in the F1 world. The rookie drove some exciting races and scored his first points as well. It's safe to say Red Bull and AlphaTauri have a driver in the form of Liam Lawson. So just when we all thought AlphaTauri will be finishing dead last in the constructors' standings, a few upgrades brought in the last leg of the season saw them improve massively and clinch a few more points to finish ahead of Alfa Romeo and Haas. That's when the concern regarding the sister team using technical knowledge of the dominant Red Bull outfit started circling the paddock. Now the Faenza-based team has always been a ground for testing new drivers and preparing them for the Red Bull squad. But going into the 2024 season, the new management at Red Bull wants to own 2 competitive teams in F1 rather than one leading the other. This was evident when Helmut Marko made comments regarding the future of AlphaTauri in August earlier this season. During the interview, Marko stated, "AlphaTauri sometimes had designers who believed that if they had the financial means that Red Bull Racing has, they would be better off there. There were always differences between Italy and England, no more in-house constructions, no more peculiarities in Faenza," implying that the team will not be using its technical expertise to create its own design concept. Rather, they will be adopting the development path similar to that of Red Bull. He further went on and said, "2 new managing directors are stepping in, bringing clear structures. Everything that is permitted by the regulations must be adopted by Red Bull Racing and AlphaTauri." Marko, being the team's advisor, claimed that AlphaTauri will be closely working with Red Bull to make them more competitive. The team will be getting parts and upgrades from the main team as much as allowed by the regulations. For a very long time, AlphaTauri either built their own parts on a far smaller budget than their sister team, or purchased parts from Red Bull that were a season old. This season, however, that changed as the new Red Bull board decided that AlphaTauri would become a fully fledged competitive F1 team instead of just a training ground for its future drivers. Throughout the season, the AT04 underwent significant upgrades, and competitors closely monitored the order of floor changes starting at the Singapore Grand Prix. Variants of the AT04 also made an appearance in Austin and at the season finale in Abu Dhabi. A major redesign, the Singapore package from AlphaTauri, featured a conversion to some of the Red Bull RB19's rear suspension components. The team has long preferred to use older Red Bull components, therefore it began the season using the RB18's rear end. Even though it is unconventional, a mid-season switch to purchasing alternative parts is permitted by Formula One's regulations, dictating which parts a team may purchase from another, and it is essentially no different from any team upgrading their own suspension. For instance, Mercedes, Aston Martin's engine supplier, provides them with their rear suspension. Even though AlphaTauri began purchasing parts from Red Bull, the company claimed throughout the season that its own advancements in aerodynamics have been the main source of its enhanced performance. With Red Bull's weakness being low-speed corners, which AlphaTauri had a significant advantage over the team in the late season upgrades, The rival teams began to speculate about how AlphaTauri might become a championship contender in the next season, and whether sharing resources could assist Red Bull aid in its limited wind tunnel testing budget. McLaren CEO Zak Brown says he still has big concerns about the partnership, despite Red Bull's team principal, Christian Horner, dismissing any notion that any regulations are being infringed and the FIA having finished compliance tests. Zak Brown said, "We have some big concerns over the alliance between AlphaTauri and Red Bull. I think that is something that needs to be addressed in the future. So, I still think the sport has a way to go to make sure that everyone is truly independent." Now, this is where the gray area of the FIA regulations are being under scrutiny. You see, the teams are allowed to form a kind of alliance, and the top teams can provide parts and upgrades to other lower teams on the grid. It's the same as Ferrari supplying parts to Haas and Mercedes, providing components such as hydraulics, engine, gearboxes, and suspension systems to Aston Martin. But the big question here is, to what extent will AlphaTauri take on the parts from the dominant RB19? Now, I know you might say that there is a specific list and parts only which can be taken from other teams, but we all know how smart these teams can be when it comes to finding loopholes and regulations. You must remember the pink Mercedes scenario that happened before, when Racing Point copied almost the entire Mercedes car from the previous season. So AlphaTauri making its own RB19 is a major possibility, and if that happens, teams like McLaren, Mercedes and Ferrari will be in huge trouble. Apart from these, there are also concerns regarding Red Bull using its sister team as a means to overcome its wind tunnel testing time deficit. So to explain this, let me give you an example. Every team is allotted a set amount of time in wind tunnel and CFD testing. Red Bull breached the budget cap, and hence they were slammed with reduction in testing time. So now many in the paddock have raised the question that both teams might work in tandem to help each other out to gain an unfair competitive advantage. So let's say it costed Red Bull 20% of its allowed testing time in the wind tunnel and CFD for their front and rear suspension, and same goes for the AlphaTauri team. So one trick that they can use is have Red Bull team only test the front suspension, and its sister team will conduct tests on the rear suspension only, in a way increasing their aero testing and CFD times. These teams can then share the technical information and parts among themselves and have an advantage over the other teams. Other than that, AlphaTauri's decision to move employees from Faenza to the UK in an effort to minimize costs by clustering around its aerodynamics unit in Bicester has stoked concerns that the company and Red Bull have overreached. Zak Brown further went on to say, "It is two teams with common ownership, which you wouldn't have in other sports. It could benefit Red Bull in a lot of different ways. There is a reason why they are moving a lot of their people from Italy. As Helmut has said, they are going to do absolutely everything they can to benefit from having two teams. I get that because that's what the rules say. But I think we need to look at the governance of the sport around technical alliances. So what do you think? Is Zak Brown right? And is Red Bull and AlphaTauri working together to gain an unfair gain over the teams? And will the FIA do anything about this loophole that Red Bull found? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button